Hello and welcome to Model Kit Tuesday on Patrick's Models and Transport. Today we're having a look at a Zvezda 1100 T-26 Soviet tank. Here we go. Zvezda is a well-known manufacturer of model kits from the main successor state of the Soviet Union, so we can say that it's made in the ex-Soviet Union. Anyway, let's go back to Soviet times. So this is a very nice little model which is used, these models are also used as place markers in a strategy game. But you can also collect them and make very nice model, well-detailed model kits out of them. And as you can see, this is a very simple model to build because there are, I'm having a look at the box again now, there are 5 pieces: the turret, the upper hull, the lower hull, and the track and rollers assembly. So most of the fun is in painting it, and I'm just going to use these rails as a turntable to show you it on. You can see that when I assembled this, I assembled the hull, then I painted the tracks and rollers, and then I fitted them onto the model. And I used Vallejo olive green mixed with a spot of yellow to obtain that lighter shade of olive green which was typical of Soviet military vehicles in World War II. More or less, it's mixed in a 3:1 ratio, so 3 parts of olive green and 1 part of matte yellow. This T-26 is a radio tank, a tank fitted with a radio. Not all of them had radios, as we can see by the large handrail antenna fitted to the side. You can see all the small. It's a very nice moulding. We can see all the details. The trailing arm here, the suspension arm with the leaf spring, the exhaust pipe here at the back. I painted matte black, and I even painted the muzzle, the front of the muzzle, spotted black there. The model didn't come with decals. I looked at lots of reference photographs, and I found also to get the right shade of the rollers and all the rest of it, and I decided to go for a couple of numbers, 2 numbers per side. Number 12, which would have been the unit number. Generally they didn't sport red stars because a red star on your turret or on your hull would be a perfect bullseye for the enemy. And I recycled these number 12, these numbers here from another Zvezda model kit from the same series, but in 1/144 scale, the Polikarpov I-16 fighter plane, which is up there. There we go. You can see that in another video in the same playlist of Model Kit Tuesday. I published that some time ago, I think it was last spring, but it's there. I can always add the link in the description box. So, why number 12? Well, I went for number 12 because my wife's, our anniversary, our very first anniversary, me and my wife's, is actually the 12th of August. That's when we got together, even before getting married. And so I decided to dedicate the number to that particular date. How romantic to have to dedicate a model tank to your wife. And I told her it's a 12 because of the 12th of August. Anyway, she enjoyed it, she had a laugh. Anyway, now we can talk about the T-26 tank. So the T-26 is a light tank, Soviet light tank. One of the first modern tanks built by the Soviet Union. It was based on a British design, on the Vickers 6-ton tank, which was a very successful British export model, which was never adopted by the British Army for... Honestly, I think it would have been a good tank for at least the beginning of World War II to have in numbers, because it was a mass-produced tank. And the Soviets actually improved it in many ways. and it was used, it was entered production in 1931. Production more or less ended around 1941 after the invasion, or the German invasion of the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa. Production was moved in 1941 from Leningrad to Chelyabinsk. I think it did continue for a period. Now I don't have data on how long it remained in production for, but the T-26 remained on active duty, combat role, right up to 1945. But let's go through its history in chronological order. So, enters production 1931, 31, 32. The very first war it was involved in was the Spanish Civil War, where it was one of the most successful tank. Spain did not field tanks at the beginning of the Civil War. Spain fielded some armoured cars, if I remember, don't remember badly, but I can't remember about any tanks. Tanks arrived on the battlefield, provided by the Italians and the Germans on the nationalist side, and by the Soviets for the Republican side. We have to remember that Franco's rebels were supported by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, and we'll mention Italy again in a few seconds. The Soviets sold, and this was a very, very expensive war for Spain, because they received help, but they paid for it. Both the Republicans and the Nationalists, they paid for it dearly in money terms. But of course, in a civil war, you pay for it dearly, even in human terms. But the Spanish Civil War is a very interesting historical event, and definitely you can find some very, very interesting videos here on YouTube. Anyway, the Soviets actually provided their most up-to-date military technology to the Republicans. Among them also the Polikarpov I-16, which was nicknamed by the Spanish Rata, the rat, no? The fighter plane. And this tank was very successful because the Italians fielded the CV-33 tankette with twin machine guns, and the Germans, I think, fielded the Panzer I. If I don't remember badly, please correct me if I said something wrong. This is a light tank, but light towards medium, no? Both the German one and the Italian tankette are definitely light tanks. In fact, it was such a successful tank that at the outcome of the Civil War, we all know that the Nationalists won. They had a much more efficient military organization. They were united. The Republicans were divided. There were lots of problems and lots of infighting. And the Nationalists won. And all the captured, they continued employing the T-26 until 1951. So it's very interesting to see footage of military parades in Spain of the interwar period, or Victory Parade in 1939, the interwar period, and even post-war, where we see the T-26 tanks still in service, and they're actually coming along side by side with German Panzer IVs, which were provided to, which I think Spain actually built on their license. And it's very, very interesting images. And anyway, going back to our tank, and that's another thing regarding the Spanish. I'd like to get another one of these and to make it in Spanish markings. I'd like to make one in Republican markings, if possible. I'd also see what markings it would have been, and if you can replicate them at such a small scale, and also nationalist ones, or nationalist post-war. That would also be interesting to see what shade of green they used, and so on and so forth. One such tank has been preserved in Spain at the Military Museum in Madrid in nationalist colour. So it's got the Spanish red and yellow flag on it, not the red, yellow and violet one of the Spanish Republic, because the Spanish Republic adopted a different flag. Anyway, so military career of the T-26, so Spanish Civil War, then it was involved in the border wars between Russia and Japan in Manchuria. So between the Soviet Union, my geography is, when I studied European geography, there was a Soviet Union. So there's this mistake. It's honestly calling the Soviet Union Russia is a bit like calling, in many ways, calling Great Britain England. Great Britain or the United Kingdom is United Kingdom because there's Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, etc., etc. So, Soviet Union, right, between the Soviet Union and Japan in Manchuria. So the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, for example, these tanks, together with the BT-7 tanks with Christie suspension, were fought against the Japanese and were successful against the Japanese. Japanese tanks, we know that their designs were pretty weak. And these tanks, the T-26s, were also employed in the Winter War against Finland in 1940, where, with very heavy losses on behalf of the Soviets, the Red Army, the Finns captured a lot of these tanks. They put them in service again. They repaired them, and they continued in Finnish service in non-combat roles until 1961. And then, of course, they were involved in Operation Barbarossa when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. Vast amounts were in bad mechanical condition at the beginning of Operation Barbarossa. Enormous losses and destruction. But they continued fighting on. The T-26 took part in the Battle of Moscow. It took part in the Battle of Leningrad, the Siege of Leningrad, also because there was a factory, but they were made in Leningrad. There was also a factory in Stalingrad, the tractor factory, the famous tractor factory. They moved production to Siberia. And they continued fighting, not more on secondary lines. The Battle of the Caucasus, for example, in the first part of the Great Patriotic War, of the World War II, against the Germans. But they had an active role right at the very end of World War II, when the Soviets declared war on Japan in 1945, and they took part in the military operations in Manchuria against the Japanese occupation army of Manchuria in northern China. And that was their last active role in combat. So a very successful tank, despite as a design very long-lived. Of course, on what was the Western Front for the Soviets, and we have to remember that Japan and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, which was very handy for the Soviets because they were able to. They didn't have to keep many troops on their eastern border against Manchuria, towards China, and they were able to concentrate all their efforts against the invading Germans and their allies to the west. It had a very long career, despite being, at the end, it was a very obsolete tank. And it also took part, and that's another very interesting, there's some very interesting photos and film footage that you can see, in the joint British-Soviet invasion and occupation of Persia, or Iran, in 1941, where after the Soviet Union was attacked by the Germans, it was absolutely essential to open a communication line with the Allies, with the Western Allies, and they did that through Persia, through India. So we see very interesting photos and film footage of Soviet troops and British troops of the British Indian Army in Persia, in Iran, and the Soviets were generally using T-26 tanks, BT-7s, and BA-3 armored cars. And because, of course, T-34s, the important hardware was all being used against the Germans. And we see the British with light Vickers with light tanks, tankettes, armored cars. It's very, very interesting to see these photographs where we see British and Soviet soldiers together in Iran. Very, very interesting. Of course, what had happened was that the Shah of Iran was sort of more pro-Axis, and they had to make sure that Iran would not join the Axis, and so they invaded it. There was also it was quite a fast thing, but there were losses on behalf of the Iranians. The Iranian fleet was attacked. Anyway, it was a blitzkrieg, a lightning war, you could say. So that's that. It was very, very interesting, very interesting military operation to look up, because World War II is a very complex affair, and I've always been interested, of course, in the main war theatres, but I've also always had an interest in the secondary fronts, and there's really an enormous quantity of very, very interesting images that can be very useful for modelling. So that's that, the T-26. Going back to Italy and the war in Spain, you can see that the T-26 looks quite... There's an Italian tank that looks quite similar, which is the M13. Because during the war in Spain, in 1937, there was the Battle of Guadalajara, where the Italian volunteer troops, sent by the Italy, were defeated by the Spanish Republicans and by the international brigades. And in particular, in these international brigades, there were Italian anti-fascist volunteers. So it was the very first time since the beginning of fascist regime in Italy that there was fighting between fascists and anti-fascist Italians. Of course, we can't brand all the volunteers who fought on the Francoist side, the Italian volunteers. They can't all say that they were convinced fascists. Many people were there because of economic convenience. You were an officer serving in the army, you were a soldier doing military service, and if you went as a volunteer to Spain, if you volunteered, you would then get some advantages. When you're demobbed, you would maybe be able to be employed by the railways, get a job in the public administration. So there were some conveniences. And I remember that my middle school Italian teacher, his father was an Air Force pilot, and he told us once that his father had fought in the war, in the Spanish Civil War, in the Italian Air Force that was employed there. And he said my father wasn't a fascist, but he had a family. He was an Air Force officer, and they paid him well. He was very honest. He said, my father went there it was active duty and good pay. And that was that. So it's very difficult to judge, I think. Of course, here we're not talking about other things that happened in World War II. We're talking about war is war. It's not nice, and that's it. But it happened, and it's part of history, and it's important to study it and to know about it. And I think that the more information we spread, the more things we know about it, the better it is for all of us. Anyway, going back to, because I'm sort of making I'm wandering away about this business here of Italy and the Battle of Guadalajara. The Italians in Guadalajara were fielding the CV-33 light tankettes, which were knocked out very quickly by the T-26s. Then the Italians were able to study this tank. The tanks were captured by the nationalists, and the M13 medium tank is a very close relative of the T-26. Very similar in outline, very similar in mechanical layout, and very similar in suspension. The Italian tank has a diesel engine. I can't remember what kind of I'm just checking some data here on the T-26. The T-26 has a petrol engine. I'm checking. Engine is a 4-cylinder petrol air-cooled 6.6 litre engine. And Armstrong Siddeley type. Instead, the Italian M15 has a diesel engine. I'll add a photo of a link in the description box, a link to a video of an Italian M13 tank that I filmed 2 years ago at a military vehicle museum open day, which will give you an idea of also what one of these looks like in real life. But you can find lots of very interesting videos of T-26 tanks, preserved ones. There are quite a few, and some are also in working order. So that's that for the moment. Cheerio, and see you next time. Ciao, ciao.